You're listening to continuing coverage in the suitcase murder, the trial of Sarah Boone, from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today. Now, back to the courtroom.
You remember Sarah testifying? No, that was the night before. I complained about that, and I think one of them had testified. Yes, she had said something about being drugged down the night before. It may have been, can't remember now who it was. One of them. And, you know, it looked like that there may be some implication that Sarah got him in the suitcase and pushed him down the stairs. But I think we didn't hear anything more of that. Remember? And then this photograph, which we introduced, which shows the bottom of the stairs. As you can see, there's Lucas's bookshelf right here. This is where Sarah Boone stored Lucas's stuff. And you can see it's not disturbed at all. Anyway, I want to get back to Sarah. I want to talk a little bit about that. But let me talk a little bit about the law on justifiable use of force. Is legal and lawful if you reasonably believe, I think we all probably already understand it by now, you reasonably believe it was necessary to prevent imminent threat to harm. The law is crucial, ensuring that individuals can safeguard themselves in potentially dangerous situations. By acknowledging you have a right to defend yourself when you have a reasonable belief that force is necessary to prevent an attack. Okay? What did Mr. Henderson say in jury selection? You don't have to wait. You do not have to wait. If you're facing, in your mind, a reasonable, imminent threat, you don't have to wait. Let's talk about Sarah Boone and this unconventional form of physical restraint to block the attack of Jorge Torres. What did she say? You saw it. Now, you got to think about that. You got to think about what was going on. You got to think about the trauma she was undergoing. You got to think about they've both been drinking. And you got to think about the fact that it was all fun and games for a while. And I think the biggest thing to know is that Jorge Torres chose to get in the suitcase. He's a grown man. That was his choice. She didn't force him in at gunpoint to get into that suitcase. He voluntarily got into that suitcase because they were drunk and being silly and stupid and playing hide and seek. Which I guess when you get so drunk, that seemed like a good thing. Zipped him up, they're laughing, carrying on. And as you know, Sarah likes to videotape a lot. And I know you've seen some of these videos and you're wondering why, but I think the evidence shows that when George is being videotaped, he's not going to do anything. If you think about that. When George is being videotaped, that's like her power. You know, Dr. Harper said that Sarah's words are her power. Sarah's words are her power. Physically, she's no match for George. Physically, she's no match. But that's her power, in other words. When she gets a chance to have some control, that's what she does. And she videotapes because she knows when she's videotaping, she can tell it like it is. I can tell him what I want to tell him. A couple of these videos you've seen where she's telling him like it is. But she's got that video camera on and George knows. He's being videoed. We've got one that we're going to show you in a little bit. where he loses it just a little bit, right at the end. And of course, we got the TV. But they're kidding around, playing around. Then, Sarah realizes, okay, this is my chance to say something to him. So she sits down, she turns on the phone, and you've seen the tape. You've seen the tape. For everything you've done to me, are the first words out of Sarah's mouth when the video begins. There's a lot packed into those words. Think about that. For everything you've done to me. This is how it feels when you choke me. Now that's in direct response and the result of the abuse that she has suffered at the hands of Jorge Torres. She wants him, for that moment, to feel how she feels. She wants, for that moment, to feel, for him to feel how she feels. How uncomfortable, lack of control that she feels when George is violent with her. Just for a moment, she wanted him to feel that. And if you can imagine,
Approach.
I think from the evidence, you can determine she was crazy about it. She was crazy about it. And I don't know if, of course it's a syndrome, but she felt like she couldn't do without it. And let's say she videotapes him, and then it's turned off. And there's a 9-minute gap, 11-minute gap, whatever it is. I said 11, they're saying 9, but I think if you count 2 of the other, then it's not. But there's 9 minutes that we don't have video. But what did Sarah say? Now, if you remember when you listen on that video, George is talking in a normal voice. He's not stressed. Of course, if you're talking, you can breathe. She had said she had some air. And of course, she doesn't realize the situation, that it's going to end the way it ends. So she has no appreciation of that. It's a canvas. All she knows is an old canvas suitcase that she's got some, the 2 zippers removed or spread out a little bit so he can. So she thinks he's not being serious. But eventually he gets angry. She gets angry, he gets angry. He says words to her, and then his hand starts to come out of the suitcase. She also said his tone changed. And I know everybody's got a cadence with their spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend, but you know what I'm talking about. We've got a way of talking to people. We've got a way, your wife, your husband, you know each other. You know when they come in from work, what kind of mood they're in. Just by a couple of things, the way you can just sense it, right? Well, especially somebody as hypervigilant as Sarah and as hypervigilant as a battered spouse woman would realize that he can flip the switch at any time. When I get out of here, I'm going to end you. And he realizes he's getting out. He got his hand out. At that moment in time, in Sarah's mind, that's an imminent threat. So she's got a justifiable right to use force. What did she do? She went over there and grabbed it. She lifted it up. She tried to get his hand back in, remember? She tried to get his hand to go back in. Wouldn't go back in, so her son's back was 3 feet away. Where the police found it the next morning. Same spot. No attempts to hide. No attempts to delete the phone. No attempts to tamper with evidence. Nothing. In the same spot as it was. She picks up the bat, and she pokes. And she pokes him hard, trying to get him to stop trying to get out. And eventually he does. And you've seen the blunt force injuries, and you saw some of the circular injuries where you can tell there's a poking. I think it's right around here. And she poked him several times. You remember the pathologist said, I think, maybe 5, 6, or 7 times. She pokes him. And he's got some scratches. I don't know if they'll let you look at it, but on the back of that suitcase, it's got some bars, some metal bars that are inside the lining. There's some lining, and it's for support when you walk it down. She testified. You heard what she said, that she was justified. That's uncontroverted testimony. Now, let's talk about the jury instructions just for a minute. And, I want to talk about reasonable doubt for a minute. Can't find the page, but I've got to pull up here. Let me find it. If y'all are all looking, I think it's on page 15 of 22. And we're going to talk about reasonable doubt in a minute, but if you look at those bottom 3 short paragraphs, it is the evidence introduced in this trial and it alone that you're to look for the evidence or look for that proof. A reasonable doubt as to the guilt of the defendant may arise from the evidence itself, a conflict in the evidence, or lack of evidence. But here's the main thing. And, obviously, I represent her, and I'm trying my best to show you honestly and fairly the doubt in this case. And 5 reasonable doubts, 17 reasonable doubts, 25 reasonable doubts. You have to have 1 reasonable doubt. I'm trying to show you throughout the evidence that each one of you can have a different reasonable doubt. A difference, but 1 reasonable doubt about the state's case, and your verdict is not guilty, according to law. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt does not mean proof beyond all doubt. A reasonable doubt is not a mere possible doubt, speculative doubt, or imaginary or forced doubt. Such a doubt must not influence you to return a verdict of not guilty if you have an abiding conviction of guilt. And this is a deeply held belief. Reasonable doubt is the highest standard we recognize in litigation. Car wreck or something like that is preponderance of the evidence standard, 51%, you're entitled. Abiding conviction, that's a deeply held belief that you must have if you're thinking about something. That's a firm belief. That's a level of certainty that you would have. That's what you got to have as a juror. I've got to be certain of her guilt. If, on the other hand, if after carefully considering, comparing, and weighing all the evidence, which we want you to do, there is not an abiding conviction of guilt. So I'm not certain. I'm not certain of her guilt. Or if you have a conviction, I think there's some evidence of guilt, but it is one that is not stable, one which wavers and vacillates. One which wavers and vacillates. Then the charge is not proved beyond a reasonable doubt, and you should find the defendant not guilty because the doubt is reasonable. You understand that? You've got to be certain of guilt. That's the high standard we recognize. If I've got some evidence of guilt, so okay, there's some evidence for conviction, but it's not stable. It wavers and vacillates. Then under our system, you've got a reasonable doubt. And you've got the power and authority and the obligation under the law if that's the way you feel, to vote that way. Later in the instruction it goes on, it's up to you to decide what evidence is reliable. You should use your common sense in deciding which is the best evidence and which evidence should not be relied upon in considering your verdict. You may find some of the evidence not reliable or less reliable than other evidence. You may rely on your own conclusion about the credibility of a witness. That is totally the province of the jurors to decide that. A juror may believe or disbelieve any or all the part of the evidence or the testimony of any witness. I want to show you this before I forget it. But Dr. Warner said, this is their expert again. He testified that Sarah Boone suffers from battered spouse syndrome. Battered women's experiences affect her perception of imminent danger. Those past experiences with Jorge Torres, and there's a bunch, affect their perception. Remember Dr. Michael Brandon talked about perception of imminent danger. Victims of repeat violence may fear death in situations others would not. The reason Sarah experiences all this, the reason she was feeling the way she was feeling, that imminent threat of danger from George, was because of Jorge Torres. Jorge Torres is responsible for her mental state because of the way he has violently treated her. She reacted to his attempts to get out because of the way he treated her and the way she knows what is he going to do if he gets out of the suitcase. She knows. The second video is played. She's flipped it back upside right. You hear him, it's 22 seconds. He says, Sarah, she's not going to open that suitcase. She's not going to open that suitcase. He's already threatened her. She used the bat to get him to stop trying to get out of it. Why would she do that? Why would she do that? I know what he's going to do. I know what he's going to do to me. I know him like I know him more than he knows himself. I know what he's going to do to me. You don't have to wait. That was justifiable. Now, you got to understand this. She intentionally used the bat to defend herself. She intentionally didn't unzip him to defend herself. Both of those are lawful under our law. She went upstairs. The dogs were upstairs. At some point she called her husband, her ex-husband, Brian Boone. We know that many times she testified, or somebody in court said, she would often flee to her ex-husband's house sometimes. I believe that testimony came out from either Sarah or somebody. That sometimes she would flee, or sometimes she would flee to upstairs. One of those two. But the dogs were up there. She made a phone call. At some point she fell asleep. Passed out, fell asleep. We don't know. They had 2 big bottles of wine. Right? That was unintentional. That was unintentional. His death was unintentional. You remember when she was in the interrogation room? You remember that? Now, I don't know if we did a good job of this, but it came out that she got arrested. You remember the one time when she got the black eye? she got arrested for strangulation. And you remember that? They ended up over there by the dryer, and he was banging her back of her head on the floor that had very little carpet on it. And she ended up getting her arms out, and then she grabbed his neck. And she eventually got him off of her, and that's when he got up and stomped her in the eye. Remember? Well, the police came for that event, and they took statement, and Sarah was honest with the officers about what all, and they arrested her. You remember? Remember that? They arrested her. And she said, why? I was fighting back. You remember that? Why? I was fighting back. So from that point on, she didn't trust law enforcement. The video that they showed a while ago about George, that was about dropping the case, where she was defending herself and fighting back. I want to talk about this investigation by law enforcement. Now, she didn't know the law. She's not a lawyer. She gets up the next morning. Brian's calling. Sarah's got to pick up Lucas at 3. Brian's calling. Eventually she walks down. She's looking for George. Where's George? He's quiet down there. Then she looks in the bathroom. She looks out. He's smoking a cigarette. He's on the computer. She sees the suitcase. And you can imagine.
Objection. Golden rule.
Sustained.
She sees him in the suitcase. She panics. What does she do? She tries to get her fiancé out of the suitcase. They're engaged to be married. She's not trying to kill him. They're engaged to be married. She gets him out. She tries to do, he's purple. She tries her best to do CPR. She doesn't, and you heard her, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know, call Brian. That's her safety valve. That's all she's got. Brian eventually says, she's come over. She calls again in 2 minutes. I'm on the way. He gets there. You got to call 911. May have told her before. Call 911. She calls 911. She tries to do CPR again. Is she busy trying to hide evidence? Is she busy trying to hide evidence? Is she busy trying to hide the back? No. She's trying to save his life. If she can. So the police get there. She knows if she told them, she fought back, she's going to be arrested. That's what happened before. What happened before, like George has said on the video, she'd never been arrested before. Before that time, she was charged with that with George. She lies. She lies. She's scared. She's scared. She doesn't know what to do. So she lies. She makes a decision to lie. Don't trust law enforcement. She doesn't know the law. She doesn't call a lawyer. She talked to Officer Rodriguez, who was the first short black female that came up here first, the first one that arrived with the body cam. Talks to her. There's a recorded statement there where she doesn't tell the whole story. She lies. And then the detectives eventually get there and get her in the squad car. You hear the audio. I think it was played. She lies again. Then the next day, she goes down to the sheriff's department. Now, if they would have told her, hey, man, we're going to arrest you, and she gets a lawyer to go down there, to make a statement. And the lawyer will advise her.
Objection. Facts not in evidence.
Sustained.
Move to strike.
Stricken. The jury will pay no mention or give any weight to that statement.
She's not a lawyer. She didn't have a lawyer present when she made those statements. She didn't know the law. She didn't know she was justified in defending herself the way she did in this dysfunctional, toxic, abusive relationship. I don't know if you remember, it was a 2-hour video, but there were some things she said, it was not intentional. And eventually, she wanted the detective, it was Detective Lowen, the male detective. And she said, I swear to you on my son's life, it was not intentional. What she was talking about was that George passed, was that George died. That was not intentional. She thought he was fine in there. Would he sober up? We've learned from their history, when Sarah gets drunk, she calls for help. When George gets drunk, he beats Sarah. That's their pattern. How many times do we see Sarah call the law? That's their pattern. Sarah told him, I didn't know, I think she said, I didn't know something like this could happen. I've never done it before. And Detective Lowen said to me, what did you expect was going to happen? Now, I've got a daughter that she was about 18 or 19, and she got a grandmother's hand-me-down pickup truck. It was an older truck, but she didn't have it long, and she was gassing it up, but she didn't put any oil in it. And eventually, it burnt the motor. And you don't know what you don't know. I hadn't done a good job of explaining, hey, you got to put oil in it too. Sarah Boone didn't know that he could die in there. It's an old beat-up canvas suitcase that she left a gap in. And as naive as that sounds, she didn't appreciate the danger. I mean, is that the way you want to kill somebody? Is that the way you're going to do it? She had Lucas to take care of. Am I going to go to prison doing it like this? No attempt to hide the crime. I think the evidence is clear. That's how this happened. I don't want to belabor the point. I do want to show you. Just quickly show you the ending. Sarah Boone got stabbed. Well, think about that. Stabbed with a steak knife in the leg. And she stayed with him. She stayed with him. Poked between the eyes with a curtain rod. Stalked in the eye. And who does that? law empowers an individual to defend their life and safety when faced with a threat and to prevent an attack. That's what Sarah Boone did. That's what Sarah Boone did. I think it's important to understand Sarah had to be the parent a lot of times. It was her place. She had that $1,000 a month from the divorce settlement coming in. She had the car. She had the phone. She had the keys. She had to be the parent in a lot of ways. I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Harper. If you remember, Dr. Harper is from Okaloosa County, which is up in the Panhandle, close to where we're from. And she's the doctor that treated Sarah from early on. Remember, this happened in 2020. I think she first saw Sarah Boone shortly thereafter. And over the 4.5 years, saw her 9 times and did all the testing for post-traumatic stress. Of course, she has the experience from the veterans, and she's testified that she's now just traveling around the state, testifying as a forensic psychologist. But she talked about how important it was to develop trust with the patient over a course of time. It's just going to take time when you have somebody suffering that kind of trauma and that kind of damaged psyche. It's going to take some time to get them where they can trust you and really tell you and talk to you and tell you what's going on with them. She talked about that Sarah uses her words for power. I think her testimony, I think the evidence supports that her testimony was credible.
Objection.
The evidence supports that her testimony was credible.
Objection is sustained.
I can't give my personal opinion. Okay? The evidence supports that her testimony was credible because of the time that she spent, because of the number of tests that she did, and she diagnosed her with post-traumatic stress disorder, alcohol use disorder, I think anxiety disorder, and battered spouse syndrome. Of course, Dr. Warner confirmed that, and Dr. Michael Brannon, the first witness, he was brought in as a subject matter expert, so he hadn't treated Sarah. He was just testifying about the condition. He'd been doing it a long time. He was an expert at it, and that's to advise you to try to understand what's going on. And as crazy as it sounds, in this syndrome, they try to protect the abuser. They're in love with them. They try to protect them. I don't know if you remember that there was a time where Sarah Boone had a conversation with one of the neighbors, and they were talking about something, and she said, "Did you hear anything yet last night?" Remember, she said, "Shh, it's okay." Both George and Sarah lied to the police. They lied to medical people. I don't know if it's shame, but it just comes with the syndrome. that you stay trapped in it. I think another big, if you'll think about this. When Sarah gets beaten by George, she calls the police. When Sarah gets beaten by George, she calls the police. And a lot of times she just wants him out. Just get him out. Get him to leave. She doesn't want him to get in trouble. She just wants him out. There never was a report of George calling the police on Sarah. She wasn't physically abusing him. The state is trying to present evidence that she emotionally abused him.
Sustained.
Move to strike.
Stricken. Members of the jury will pay no attention to that comment. Give it no weight whatsoever.
I believe the evidence that's been presented by the state is an attempt to show that Sarah mentally or emotionally abused George Torres. Again, she's not charged with that. She's not perfect. Some of that was her trauma. In Sarah's situation, you do become numb and hardened, I think, over time. That's a coping mechanism. It's a day-to-day thing, some good days, some, But the homicide detectives, I know if you saw that 2-hour video, at some point during the 2-hour video, they started talking about some of the violence. And they go, we know. They had already checked with neighbors or whoever. They knew. The neighbors knew. Police officers knew who responded. Torres' family knew. They all knew about the abuse. Dr. Harper testified that abused women act differently when they perceive a threat. I think Sarah Boone was loyal to a fault to George, even through all the abuse. Judge, I want to make a comment about a couple of things that were said by the prosecutor in opening statement.
You may proceed.
Okay. The prosecutor in opening statement, when he was talking about George Torres passing away, and started talking about Sarah Boone, and his quote was, because I wrote it down, George, in Sarah Boone's mind, George Torres deserved it. George Torres deserved it. That's the position they're taking. He deserved to die. She loved the man. She wasn't trying to kill him. He also commented about...
Judge, may we move the motion?
Yes.
The prosecutor said in opening about the violence, the violent episodes. It's a bunch of violent nonsense, was his statement to you in opening statement. All this here, the photographs, is a bunch of violent nonsense. You'll have to make your mind up whether that's accurate. There were a couple of exhibits that I introduced late, and they were no contact provisions, where there had been a court order from a judge, not only a verbal order, but it was reduced to writing. So there was a court order for George Torres not to have any contact with Sarah Boone. Okay? Court system got involved. They would have no contact with George Torres. Now, I need to talk a little bit about that. And they talked about coercion, coercive control, power and control, power and control. We know about his abuse. We know he destroyed the home, the TV. We know about his jealousy. You know, some of the things he said to her. We know about how he treated her dogs. Nicely when he was sober, but at times he abused the dogs or threatened to do so. If you think about power and control, when you're controlling a person, and I think she testified that he kind of smothered her, was always around her. Part of his fear was her realizing that she'd had enough and to leave him for good. That she would get the strength over time if she had enough time away from him where she wasn't in control of it and he wasn't in control of it. Enough time away, she would come to her senses and realize she could do better. The judge has been giving court orders all week. That didn't stop George Torres. George Torres knew he was going to lose control if she had a bunch of time away from him. She might move on. He was willing to violate a court order to maintain control. That's George Torres. I want to show a couple of videos, and I want to say something to you. Shelby Andrews is going to help me. If we could dim the lights.
Yes.
Do you understand?
What do you mean?
As of this moment, and until I can get you out,
Get the fuck out of here.
you're a roommate. I dare you.
Did you see him?
No, look at him. Like, get away from me. Get away from me. Get away from me. I'm gonna scream bloody murder. I'm gonna scream bloody murder.
Did you see him flip the switch? In that instance? Where he lost it? Even though the video was going. Show the next one. Thank you. Thank you, Judge. You turn it off. Can you turn it off? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to finish up right here. And, Sarah Boone, I've gotten to know.
Objection. Improper argument.
Sustained.
Sarah Boone is like any other citizen. Equal justice under the law. She's to be treated like any other citizen. Fairly and impartially. Based on the circumstances she was facing at the time of this tragedy. based on the battered spouse instruction, which is a special instruction that's given when women have a heightened sense of fear and trauma, that you're to utilize in applying her subjective standard to the reasonable standard of what a reasonable person would do under her circumstances in using the force that she used to defend herself. I hope I hadn't missed anything. I've tried my best. Sarah Boone fought back and survived. We ask that you do justice in this case and find her not guilty because the doubt is reasonable. I've tried to show you where the doubt was. I trust your judgment. We spent a long time picking the jury, 4 days. We trust you. We appreciate your service and your obligation to do your duty. You have the power and authority to right this wrong. That's what we're asking you to do. And give Sarah Boone some hope for a better life and freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any rebuttal?
Yes, sir.
You may proceed.
Mr. Owens.
Let me get this.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jorge Torres is dead because the defendant believed he deserved to be zipped shut in a suitcase so that she could make him feel how she felt when he cheated on her, when he choked her, and to hold him there as a captive audience, according to her testimony. Now he has to listen to me. Well, right out of the gate, there are credibility issues. Cheating to me means viewing pornography. Well, we saw cheating really means women. And the heated conversation on June 14th about these women in Facebook. And that is what leads to the arrest on June 15th. He's out whoring, Candy Crush, all the bizarre things that you see in her phone. He uses the legal system as a weapon at times. There's no denying that they are engaging in violent behavior, and it is over nonsense. It is smashing TVs. They call the police, and then they're standing there looking bewildered about what to do and who to say, and laughing and joking. Ladies and gentlemen, the courtroom is the place for justice, not a suitcase. The reason we have a jury system originally started with the idea that the king, the crown in England, shouldn't be able to go and incarcerate citizens on his whim. So it developed into a system where citizens would have to say, yes, you can take our fellow citizen. But the opposite is also true. A citizen cannot take another citizen's life because he or she feels like it. That likewise requires a jury to decide that it was objectively reasonable for a person of ordinary prudence and caution. Like Mr. Cacciatore argued earlier, battered spouse syndrome is not a license to kill. Past grievances, even being stabbed in the leg, so on and so forth, do not give her the license to kill. There are still laws in place about when and how this can be done in a justifiable manner. I want to talk about the most important jury instruction in this case that has not been discussed very well, or thoroughly, excuse me.
More continuing coverage in the suitcase murder. The Trial of Sarah Boone is on the way. From the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today. Press subscribe now.